Hey guys, we're ready for chapter 16 today. That's ridiculous, Jonah said. Impossible. Well, why? Chip asked. Jonah barely stopped himself from giving an answer that would have sounded like his dad. Because the government is set up to serve the people, not to ruin kids' lives by making them move. Instead, he mumbled, why would they care where Daniela McCarthy lives? How could it matter to them and direct her family to the exact house? Maybe one of Daniela's parents is a top secret scientist, Chip said, and some enemy is about to drop a bomb on their house, so the FBI is moving them there for their own safety. Jonah frowned at Chip and rolled his eyes. It's Daniela's name on the list, Jonah said, not her parents. Well, maybe that's just some sort of code, Chip argued. What about all the other 13-year-olds on the list? Are all of their names some kind of code, Jonah asked. My parents aren't top secret scientists. I can tell you that. And nobody's ever tried to make us move. Still, Jonah felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach at the thought of moving. He'd lived his whole life in the same house. Well, his whole life since he'd been adopted. My mom would never agree to leave our house, not even if the president himself begged her to, he said. She spent too much time babying that rhododendron bush in our backyard, and her roses and her grapevines and everything else. Jonah had never cared that much about the rhododendron bush. He'd always thought Mom made way too much of a fuss about those gorgeous blooms, and do you think they're a little smaller than usual? Should I test the soil acidity again? But now he pictured Mom clutching the trunk of the bush while some official-looking government types tried to pull her away, them arguing, but you have to go, while she countered, I'll never leave, never. The image was strangely comforting. Hey, Jonah looked up to see the bus driver in the aisle in front of them. He was glowering. Let me explain something to you two, he growled. I pull up to your bus stop, you get on the bus. I pull up to your school, you get off the bus. It's not that complicated. Jonah realized that they were at school now, and he and Chip were the only kids still on the bus. Oh, sorry, he said, jumping up, grabbing his backpack. Maybe you want to go to the elementary school instead, the bus driver asked. He seemed amused now. That's my next run. This is the day when all the little kids stay on the bus extra long to learn bus safety. Maybe you need that just to learn to get off and on. No, that's okay, Chip mumbled, scrambling up behind Jonah. The bus driver stepped back between two of us on the seats to let them pass him in the aisle. He was laughing at them. What a jerk, Jonah muttered as soon as they were out on the sidewalk. Other kids from the other buses streamed past them into the school. He tried to blend into the crowd. At least no one else had been on the bus to hear the driver making fun of them. Chip grabbed Jonah's arm. After school, I'm going to call Daniela back, Chip said. Maybe she'll have calmed down by then. And I want to call back the other kids on the list to ask why they moved. You'll help now, won't you? Remember what you promised me? I'll do everything I can to help you. Chip's imitation of Jonah's voice was frighteningly accurate. I didn't know what I was promising, Jonah wanted to argue. That was last week. I thought I'd just have to quote from what to tell your adopted and foster children, not solve mysteries, not see ghosts, not call strangers, not figure out the FBI, not worry about my own past. Chip's blue eyes were pleading and desperate. Catherine's all right and everything, but she's too cheerful about all of this, Chip said. She thinks it's fun. What's wrong with fun? Jonah wanted to ask, but he knew exactly what Chip meant. All right, Jonah said reluctantly. After school. The day dragged. Jonah couldn't concentrate on any of his classes. More than once, his teachers noticed and said, Jonah, are you with us? Or, Jonah, didn't you hear me the first 5 times I asked everyone to open their books? On the bus ride home, Jonah made sure he and Chip didn't get too distracted. They were the first ones off the bus when it reached their stop. Catherine bounced up eagerly behind them. How many names do you want to call today? She asked. I don't have gymnastics tonight, and I did my homework already in study hall, so I'm ready to start dialing. Chip and Jonah exchanged glances. Well, see, I've got to get the mail first, Chip said weakly, and then... No problem, I can wait, Catherine said, grinning. She followed the boys to the Winston's brick mailbox. Chip took his time about reaching in, drawing out the stacks of letters and magazines and junk mail. Jonah felt like telling him, look, If you think Catherine is going to get bored and leave, forget it. Once she's into something, she never gives up. Chip was so completely into his act, trying to get rid of Catherine, that he just stood there staring at the stack of letters. Maybe it wasn't an act. Chip? Jonah asked cautiously, is something wrong? Jonah remembered that List and Ghost and the FBI weren't all they had to worry about. He remembered that letters had been the first signs of strangeness. Chip, Jonah repeated. Chip held up a letter. It's addressed to me and there's no return address, he said, but it's not like the others. He was right. This letter was in a smaller envelope, the kind used for invitations. And Chip's address wasn't typed, but written in firm, grown-up handwriting like a teacher's. Open it, Catherine said excitedly. Let's see what this one says. Jonah turned to glare at his sister. What was wrong with her? Wasn't she scared at all? How could she act so thrilled when he felt almost paralyzed with dread? Catherine missed his glare because she was snatching the envelope out of Chip's hands, ripping the letter open. Whoa, she breathed. What is it? Jonah asked. He discovered he wasn't completely paralyzed. He could crane his neck and peer over Catherine's shoulder. The letter was on a piece of generic white paper, unfolded. It said, you contacted me at 8:35 p.m. on Monday, October 2nd. I was not at liberty to discuss anything with you over the phone. If you call back, I will deny that I sent this letter. I will refuse to tell you anything more. But if it is safe, I will meet you in the conference room. B at the Liston Public Library at 3 p.m. on Saturday, October 7th. Then we can talk. Do not attempt to contact me otherwise. This is the only way. There was no signature. Ooh, so one of those people that they contacted. Yee. All right, so let's go ahead and do chapter 17 because that one was really not that long, okay? Angela Dupree, Catherine said. What? Jonah stammered. That's who this is from, Catherine said confidently, waving the letter in Jonah's face. Remember, Chip? She was the only one from the witness list who seemed kind of, regretful about hanging up on us. Is regretful a word? Jonah didn't care about words right now. Well, it could have been, what was the other woman's name? Monique Waters, Chip suggested. Oh, no, Catherine said. That woman loved hanging up on us. She was cold. And the air traffic controller talked to you, not me, Chip said, so he wouldn't send me a letter. And this is definitely a woman's handwriting, definitely, Catherine said. Jonah was getting annoyed with this little junior detective routine. So are you going, he asked, on Saturday? Chip and Catherine both stopped talking. Both of them froze with their mouths hanging open. It wasn't a good look for either one of them. Then Catherine laughed. Of course, she said, we have to. This is a complete stranger, Jonah said. She won't even sign her name. She won't talk to you on the telephone. She sounds crazy. This is how people end up getting kidnapped. But she's got information, Chip said. She might know who I am. Chip sounded so plaintive. Jonah couldn't argue anymore. If you're going to kidnap someone, you wouldn't ask them to meet at the library, Catherine said. That conference room B, that's where we used to have brownie meetings when I was a little kid. It's like glass on 3 sides and you have to walk through the whole library to get to it. It's safe. Jonah shrugged. He felt strangely dizzy, just like he had that time in Florida when he'd gotten caught in a riptide and the flimsy little flutter kick he'd learned at the Liston pool had been no match for the forces of carrying him out to sea. Jonah's dad had jumped in and saved him that time. He can't save me now, Jonah thought desperately. We can't tell Mom and Dad anything about this. Can't tell them we're meeting a stranger. Can't tell them we've been calling strangers, and can't tell them we took pictures off of a file, a secret file. Besides, Catherine was saying, there'll be 3 of us together and no one adult can kidnap 3 kids. How can you be so sure she won't bring anybody with her? Jonah asked at the same time that Chip said, what if seeing all 3 of us scares her off? She sounds a little paranoid. I think it has to be just me. Well, we're all going, Catherine said. There's no question about that. They didn't get a chance to call any of the other kids on the survivors list that afternoon or the next because they were so busy debating their strategy for meeting with Angela Dupree, if that was really who'd written the letter. Saturday morning, Jonah had a soccer game and Catherine had a piano lesson, but by 2 o'clock they were both in Chip's driveway on their bikes waiting. Jonah focused on balancing carefully, lifting his toes from the concrete from the first the left side, then the right. He could straddle the bike for seconds at a time without touching the ground. As long as he concentrated on that little game, he didn't have to think about the fact that he and Catherine and Chip were about to do something incredibly stupid and probably dangerous as well. "You didn't really leave a note, did you?" Catherine asked, breaking Jonah's concentration and forcing him to slam his right foot down on the ground to keep from falling. "Well, I did," Jonah said. Catherine rolled her eyes. The note was Jonah's attempt at caution. They told Mom and Dad only that they were riding their bikes to the library. But in his desk drawer, Jonah had left a detailed note, a letter really, explaining that they were meeting a woman named Angela Dupree, or possibly Monique Waters. And if for some reason they didn't come back, someone should track her down. All the information about possible kidnappers would be on Chip Winston's computer. Catherine and Chip thought he was crazy for being so careful. Catherine sighed, blowing the air out in a way that ruffled the hair on her forehead. "Wish Mom could have driven us," she said. "Nobody rides bikes anymore." "Well, I do," Jonah said. "Girls, I mean," Catherine said. "All my friends think bikes are babyish. No one had better see me." She looked around anxiously. The street was deserted. Riding bikes versus being driven had caused a huge debate. Chip thought if they had a parent drive them, they'd have to explain why they had to be at the library exactly at 3 o'clock rather than after their moms got through at the grocery store or before their dads started watching the football game. And Jonah thought that if they had to make a quick getaway, it'd be ridiculous to stand there in the library lobby calling a parent, "Yeah, I'm ready to be picked up. Do you mind not waiting until halftime? There's kind of a murderous psychopath chasing me." "What do you really think is going to happen?" Catherine asked. Jonah shrugged. She'd been asking him that question for 2 days, and he'd never been able to explain that exactly, even to himself. He didn't truly believe that they were about to face a murderous psychopath. He just had a horrible feeling in the pit of his stomach that wouldn't go away. That garage door of Chip's house began rising, revealing Chip and his bike. Chip was grinning. "Time for some answers," he proclaimed. Jonah thought maybe Chip was trying to sound like the donkey from Shrek, carefree, glib, and full of wisecracks, even in the face of danger. But it wasn't a very good imitation because his voice cracked. "First, we've got to ride all the way over there," Catherine complained. "What is it, like 2 miles, 3? "We don't have to go," Jonah said. "Of course we do," Chip said, pushing off and sailing out into the street. Jonah let Catherine follow Chip, and then he sighed and brought up the rear. It was weird how responsible he felt for the other two. Plaintive, pitiful, confused Chip. Naive, gung-ho, enthusiastic Catherine. He and Chip were both equally tall and gangly. It wasn't like Jonah had any extra muscle for fighting off attackers. "There's strength in numbers," he told himself, pedaling hard to catch up. They passed the BP station where the high school band boosters were having a car wash fundraiser, the grocery store where Mom was right now buying peanut butter and milk and bread like it was any Saturday afternoon. The neighborhood that, according to a quick Google search they'd done, contained the Robin's Egg Lane, where Daniela McCarthy's family would soon be moving. They got to the library by 2:30. Chip was looking at his watch before he even slipped off his bike. "I've got to still wait another half hour," he said. "I thought the ride would take longer than that." "This will give us a chance to case the joint," Catherine said. Jonah knew she'd gotten that line from a movie in enough time to man our stations. Deciding how many of them should be in a conference room B at 3 o'clock and sparked their longest and bitterest debate. They eventually reached a compromise. Chip would be the only one actually in the conference room, but he'd secretly have his cell phone set on speakerphone in his lap, and he'd call Catherine, who'd be hiding out in the magazine section. She'd hold the cell phone up to both her ear and a walkie-talkie, broadcasting to the other walkie-talkie in Jonah's hand. Jonah would be in the non-fiction section near the conference room. He'd be pretending to read, facing away from the conference room, but he'd secretly have a mirror hidden in his book, directed over his shoulder so he could see what was happening to Chip every single minute. The walkie-talkie phone combo would let him hear everything that was going on in the conference room. So at the first hint of danger, he'd be able to storm in and save Chip. They'd planned everything. None of them even once had said, "This is ridiculous. Walkie-talkies, mirrors hidden in books. We'll look like fools," Jonah thought. Maybe that was proof that underneath it all, the other two were every bit as scared as he was. They leaned their bikes against the bike rack and tiptoed into the library. They peeked into conference room B. No one was there, and tested out the cell phone walkie-talkie setup. Spy 1 to Spy 2, Catherine said, giggling into the walkie-talkie. Over. Jonah switched the walkie-talkie function to send. Catherine, it works, but so help me, you've got to remember you're not supposed to do any of the talking. At 2:55, Jonah flipped the hood of his sweatshirt up so it covered the walkie-talkie pressed against his ear. He pulled a book off a nonfiction shelf at random. It was something about tax codes. He positioned Catherine's makeup mirror in the book, angled it just so. Yep, there was Chip's face, anxious and pale on the other side of the conference room's glass. Jonah moved the mirror up and down and side to side, scanning the whole room. He switched the walkie-talkie to send again. Catherine, tell Chip to stop fiddling with the cell phone, he whispered. He'll give us away. Seconds later in the mirror, Chip jerked upright. He put his hands flat on the conference room table, on top of the printouts of the survivors and witness list he'd brought from home. He raised an eyebrow at Jonah. Over his shoulder, Jonah gave him the thumbs-up signal. Catherine's giggle sounded in Jonah's ear again. Remember your theory about this woman actually being Chip's birth mother, she said. You can cross that one off your list. Jonah started to say why, but then he remembered that he needed to be silent too. Over the walkie-talkie, he heard a staticky version of Chip's voice. Oh, hello. Are you the person who reserved this conference room for 3 o'clock? The one who's willing to talk? Frantically, Jonah angled the mirror, turning his tax code book almost sideways. There, a woman walking into the conference room. Oh, a tall, statuesque, well-dressed black woman. Very dark skin, definitely not Chip's birth mother. Chip Winston, the woman was saying. Yes, Chip said cautiously, and you are? The woman stopped at the conference room doorway and looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes seemed to meet Jonah in the mirror, and she laughed. Before we begin, I'll have to ask you to turn that cell phone off, she said, and tell your friends to turn off the walkie-talkies. I appreciate their ingenuity, but they might as well come on in and listen in person. I don't know what you're talking about, Chip stammered. You're not a very good liar, are you? The woman said. I'll have to remember that. I'm talking about the girl in the magazine section in the purple shirt and the boy in the tax section reading your guide to the IRS upside down. Jonah blushed. He started to turn the book around and realized that made him look even more guilty. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Catherine standing up, rushing towards the conference room, and he waved his arms at her, trying to send a telepathic message. No, go back. Pretend you've got nothing to do with me or Chip. Act normal. Don't give anything away. Catherine ignored me. She reached the door into the conference room and began shaking the woman's hand. Catherine Skidmore, she introduced herself. Nice to meet you. Thanks for letting me join you. Catherine made it sound like they were going to be sitting around eating sugar cookies and drinking lemonade. Come on, Jonah, Catherine said. She's got us figured out. Jonah whirled around. But I don't have to go in there, do I? He said through gritted teeth. I can stay out here if I want to, so I can run for help if anything happens. Jonah was surprised to see that the woman's dark eyes were sympathetic. You're the one I want guarding the door then, she said, watching out for trouble. You can watch from the outside or watch from the inside. I don't care. She looked around, scanning the rows of bookshelves around them. No one was in sight. I'm Angela Dupree, the woman said, holding out her hand to Jonah. You can call me Angela. Hesitantly, Jonah moved forward to shake her hand. He stepped in through the glass door behind Catherine and Angela and pulled the door shut. But he didn't sit down at the table when the others did. He stayed by the door. Angela nodded respectfully at him, as if she approved of that choice. A little advice, Angela said, and a hint of laughter in her voice. The next time you do a stakeout, don't enter the building together. It was Jonah she looked at now. I got here at 2 o'clock. I've been watching the three of you for the past hour. Jonah's face burned. I guess the walkie-talkies were a stupid idea, he said. Oh, it was creative, Angela says. I would have left you to your spy games if it weren't for the range on those things. I didn't want our conversation broadcast to every trucker passing by on the highway, or others who might want to listen. She no longer sounded amused. Her eyes looked haunted. Catherine was glaring at Angela. Oh, that's right, Catherine said, almost in the same snarly catfight voice she used when she was mad at her friends. You're afraid to even talk on the phone. I have my reasons, Angela said softly, and somehow that shut Catherine up. But it's safe to talk now, Chip asked eagerly, leaning forward. You can give us answers. Angela gave another cautious look around through the glass walls into the library and then through the windows into the parking lot. Jonah realized for the first time that Angela had taken the one seat in the room that backed up to a solid brick wall. Even if Jonah weren't guarding the door, she'd made sure that nobody could sneak up on her. You're curious about your adoption, right? Angela said. What makes you think that I know anything about it? Quickly, Chip explained about the list of survivors and the list of witnesses, shoving the papers over to her so she could look for herself. See, Jonah's name is on the list of survivors too, Catherine chimed in. Mine isn't. I'm not adopted. But I'm the one who took the pictures. Oh, good for you, Jonah thought. Angela glanced at him just then, and Jonah could swear she knew what he was thinking. She smiled at him. I can tell you what I witnessed 13 years ago, she said, even though I'm not supposed to discuss it with anyone. You'll probably think I'm crazy anyhow. Chip was leaning so far forward now that Jonah was afraid he might fall out of his chair. You know where I came from? Chip asked. Where'd we come from? Angela was shaking her head, frowning ruefully. Not where exactly, she said apologetically, but I think I might have a pretty good guess about when. Ooh, when. Not where, but when. All right, that was it. See you later.